Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about the 2024 Long Island Sound Report Card. My name is Peter Linderoth. I'm the Director of Water Quality at Save the Sound, and I'm joined by some colleagues and partners today. I'm going to be introducing them as we move along, though. We've got a nice packed discussion for you. I would encourage people to, look, we're not going to take it personal. If something comes up and you want to ask a question while we're talking, just wait for a good moment. You're welcome to jump in with a question. You're also more than welcome to use the chat, which we'll be monitoring as well, and we'll keep an eye on that. And we will get to everyone's questions. And if for some reason we run out of time, for example, if I keep blabbing too much on the intro, we will be sure to follow up in the email that we'll send out. And we are recording this. So we'll also be more than happy to send out a link after today, so you can share it with all your buddies that couldn't make it. So diving right in, Long Island Sound Report Card. I will mention, for those that are interested, feel free to follow along on soundhealthexplorer.org in the Fishable section. That's the digital home of the Long Island Sound Report Card. You can also get a copy by clicking on the banner header up here and just submitting some basic information for us. And we'll send you a PDF copy of the 2024 Long Island Sound Report Card. Grades are in the Fishable section if you want to take us up on that. So we as in Save the Sound, just released the fifth iteration of the Long Island Sound Report Card. What we're looking at here are the first four. And as you can see, someone on our team must have had a thing for lighthouses. We were picking lighthouses from different areas around the Sound. Maybe you recognize some of these. It actually was a very friendly handoff, the Long Island Sound Report Card from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and they had already used a lighthouse. So we just kind of continued on with that. But our most recent, which was just released on October 10th, features animals. And yeah, we did pick smiling seals because they look good on the cover of a report card. I'm not going to lie. And yes, these are seals in Long Island Sound, and they do look like they're smiling. It doesn't hurt to have charismatic marine mammals on the cover of a report you want the general public to read. But there was also some intention here. The Long Island Sound Report Card grades the ecological health of Long Island Sound waters, both the open waters of the Sound and the bays and harbors around the margins. And so it's really only fitting that we have animals on it. Really, what I'm getting at with ecological health is how well do the waters of the Sound sustain aquatic life? How well do they support aquatic life? So we've switched to animals. If you have some suggestions or some good leads on pictures of humpback whales, that's what I'm really interested in for the next one. Feel free to drop them in the chat. What we're also looking at next to the cover are the data providers. So the Long Island Sound Report Card is fueled by water quality monitoring data. The open water grades are fueled by the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and the Interstate Environmental Commission. So they're out collecting water quality data in the open waters of the Sound, and we crunch those data for grades. The Unified Water Study Partners, I'm not going to read them all, but here they are, contribute data for the bay grades and all the bay segments. And there's 57 bay segments in this report card that received a grade. And the Long Island Sound Report Card is, as I said, related to ecological or environmental health. It's really issuing grades that reflect human impacts and the impacts of nutrients, specifically nitrogen, on our estuary. Sources of nitrogen pollution and excess nitrogen. That's an important thing to consider because we need nitrogen in Long Island Sound for it to survive, right? No nitrogen would be a dead Long Island Sound. But excess nitrogen is a problem, right? Nitrogen pollution in the form of excess nitrogen. Excess nitrogen comes from wastewater treatment plants. Even when they're treating the water that comes out, and they do, it still has nitrogen in it, in the effluent that's just constantly coming out of these plants. Fertilizers, nitrogen-rich stormwater that falls on hardened surfaces especially, and makes its way into the Sound tributaries and open waters. And then also septic tanks and cesspools, really old technology for treating wastewater that often are not doing a good job of removing nitrogen. And I want to point out that the grading process was very collaborative. So when Save the Sound took that friendly handoff from the University of Maryland, we did intend to make some adjustments to the grading, and we did. And we developed technical and brought together stakeholders into technical advisory committees that were formed for the sole purpose of developing the grading methodology, both for the open water grades, to develop the unified water study, and then subsequently to develop the grading methodology for the bays and harbors. It was a collaborative process, lots of meetings. I'm sure many people on the call today were in some of those meetings, iterations, webinars, discussions, back and forths. And we really do feel it led to the best product possible, with compromise where needed, which is always important, and just some general agreement amongst people that we're going to be seeing this thing come out every 2 years. We grade specific water quality indicators. If you go to the report card, you can see these, but in this kind of magenta colored box that I'm highlighting, I think you can see my pointer, are the open water indicators for dissolved organic carbon, dissolved oxygen, water clarity, chlorophyll A. I'm not going to go into exactly, this is a good time for questions, or put them in the chat if you're curious about any of these indicators. They all relate to ecological health, and they're all being collected by monitoring groups. The Bay indicators include some slightly different ones. So dissolved oxygen, water clarity, oxygen saturation, and seaweeds. Seaweeds being very important for bays. They're shallow water waterways, right? Systems where seaweeds can be really abundant, and where we see massive quantities of green, nutrient-loving seaweeds, for example, we often know that there's a nitrogen problem or issue. And it's important to have that complement the chlorophyll A data, which is an indication of phytoplankton in the water. So the two primary producers that we look at are seaweeds and phytoplankton, which are small, plankton in the water, plant plankton in the water. And so those two are very important to both have for the bays. Not so important to have seaweeds for waters that are 90 feet deep, right? Because the sun's not reaching the bottom and we're not getting a lot of active seaweed growth. And on that, I'd like to introduce one of the members of Save the Sounds team, Elena Colon. She's our laboratory manager. She's going to talk a little bit about the chlorophyll A samples that are collected, and also some of our work in our lab. So Elena Colon, please take it from here. And I know there's some animations.
Oh, let me put my audio. Hi, everyone. So first things off, I just want to say we are now New York ELAP accredited, which is such a big deal, especially for the data that we're collecting in terms of nutrient data. And so we used to have a contract another laboratory to process them, but now we can do it in-house and get the data results sooner. So chlorophyll A, for the Unified Water Study, we collect this data, and we have been processing chlorophyll samples in our lab since 2022. And last year alone, we collected about over 700 samples, a lot of them, and we'll probably this year, it'll probably exceed that. Every year we're adding new groups, so that increases. So yeah, we've definitely increased our capacity. Another sample specifically, produced by the Unified Water Study are nutrient samples. And so the 2023 samples are the first set of samples that we get to analyze. And so there are a lot of samples. We have, 6 freezers. We collect about over 4,000 sample bottles. And that amounts to about 650 samples per analyte. And you can see here the list of analytes: ammonia, nitrate, I won't go on. Plus we're doing replicates, quality control. There's a lot of quality control. So Lindsay Potts, our lab technician or in-house chemist, has been busily analyzing these. She's quite busy doing this work.
Yeah, she is. Wow, I feel like I could probably move my head over here and see Lindsay maybe in the lab running.
I hear her now.
Yes.
She's making all the reagents.
Yeah, she's making it happen right now.
Yeah, she's doing orthophosphate today, if anyone is interested in knowing.
So Elena, the New York ELAP accreditation was huge, right? And there's a pretty specific reason, I don't know if you mentioned it, that we decided to do New York Environmental Laboratory Approval Program accreditation. Could you speak just briefly to that?
Yeah. So every state does have an accreditation program. However, the New York ELAP accreditation is part of a larger national environmental laboratory accreditation. It's kind of the highest level accreditation you can get for our type of lab. And some of the states will, with the blessing of the, NELAC is the name of the organization, the Department of Health specifically will manage the accreditation. But some states don't, and so you have to go directly to the national organization. Connecticut does have an accreditation program, but if we say we're to get accredited by the state of Connecticut, New York would not recognize that accreditation by Connecticut. However, Connecticut does recognize accreditation by New York. So it's really important that we specifically, got accreditation in the state of New York.
Spot on.
And meeting on a national level, meaning every state will usually recognize that.
And that feeds right into Clean Water Act purposes. So for New York, they're not able, due to regulations, to use these data for their Clean Water Act assessments and impairment listings. So it was definitely a must for us, seeing that this is a bi-state program. We want to keep both states happy with those data. And Elena, congratulations to you and Lindsay on getting that accreditation. It was a massive feat. And you both,
too.
Me too. Thank you. And we really appreciate all you two do. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
And thank you to the data providers as well. So that was a sneak into our lab, but there are, over 24 groups collecting data around the margins of Long Island Sound as part of the Unified Water Study. As I mentioned, I'm not going to name them all now, but the groups that have joined us today, maybe now's a good time for me to do a quick introduction, and you're going to hear from them. Here's a picture in the top left where this yellow box is of the Friends of the Bay team, and we're joined by Caroline Fabian and Amanda today. They're going to be talking a bit about their work in Oyster Bay and Cold Spring Harbor. We also have Dr. Katerina Panseca, who's here with some members of our crew at a press release for the report card. Dr. Panseca monitors Westchester Creek, which is in New York City, not Westchester. So we'll be hearing from her a little bit later as well. And then we have Project Oceanology, way out in eastern Connecticut, beautiful area that they're in, out on their, is it the RV Sculpin? I don't know, our research vessel Sculpin, but out on their boat collecting samples in this picture. And we do look forward to hearing from Callie Sheets in a bit about their experiences with the Unified Water Study. Thanks, all three of you, for joining. But we're going to hear from another member of the Save the Sound team, Amira Khan, who is out on the water. Here she is driving the boat in one of these pictures, making sure that the monitoring that Save the Sound does, we're an active participant in the Unified Water Study, not just the administrator. And we're going to just to invite Amira for a minute or two to talk about what she does out collecting data. Take it away, Amira.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today. So today I'll be talking a little bit about what we do actually on the water. So on the right-hand side of your screen here, you see like a little bit of like an introduction of what we do. So for example, our tier 1 parameters that we're looking for when we're using our SONs, so we use our XO1 SONs, while some of our other groups use the ProDSS SONs, we're basically looking for a handful of parameters. So that includes dissolved oxygen, turbidity, chlorophyll A, qualitative macrophytes, which I'll talk about after this, and then last but not least, temperature and salinity as well. So our sampling season runs from May to October, so it is 6 months. It's actually wrapping up this week on October 31st. And what we aim for is we're looking for 2 sampling trips per month in each embayment. This gives us a good overview of the data over the course of 6 months as well. And we look for our sampling dates to be about 10 to 18 days apart. So it's not exactly looking at data from the beginning of the month or the end of the month, but more of a spaced out time frame in between there. So we're looking at our data within 3 hours of sunrise. And the critical thing about that is because once the sun rises, that also affects the dissolved oxygen rates and how that corresponds with chlorophyll production in phytoplankton, which Peter may talk about a little bit after this. So I'll let him go into depth about that. And a little bit about what we do specifically in the embayments that we cover. So we are sampling for tier 1 and tier 2 parameters. Tier 2 parameters are talk about in depth about some of the tier 1 parameters. So that includes continuous dissolved oxygen, quantitative macrophytes, as well as nutrients, as Elena had mentioned earlier. So in Eastchester Bay, we look for tier 1 and tier 2 parameters. In the photos that you see here, we are monitoring Hunter Island Bay. Before that, we do New Rochelle Harbor. We only look for tier 1 parameters in these two harbors. And then us specifically, our team, we mainly do look for nutrients and continuous dissolved oxygen, as well as quantitative macrophytes, so our tier 2 parameters in Mamaroneck Harbor as well. So based on all of that, it's about 4 embayments. And then moving on to qualitative macrophytes, that one tier 1 parameter I talked about earlier. So our goal with this is to identify areas with problematic amounts of macroalgae and areas with eelgrass, which is actually a beneficial condition. So again, it's not intended to be a quantitative assessment, but it's complementary to chlorophyll A. So from July 15th through August 7th, we are conducting 3 sampling surveys to look for those macrophytes. So we can see a lot of our groups going out during this time, in addition with their tier 1 sampling, to cover roughly about 3 to 7 stations per embayment. It's even more if you have multiple embayments, like some of our groups. So it's a lot of data that we're collecting, whether it's tier 1, tier 2, as well as our macrophytes. That we're collecting during the 6-month period.
Thanks, Amira. And so you think you have to be kind of a morning person, right, to get out and do this type of monitoring?
It's complicated because not only do you have, because sometimes I'm a morning person, sometimes I'm not.
I know I've seen it, but you always do a very good job.
It's mostly the crew that you're with and just good spirits, good vibes, and just good time.
Right. What are some of the challenges that you faced doing the monitoring? Kind of brief, we're gonna keep moving, but what are some of the
Sure.
challenges that you've seen?
A lot of times it's mostly technical issues that we have. So sometimes that could be like the boat's not working. We vibe check the boat. So we vibe check vibe check our emotions. We vibe check the boat too. Um, we also do sometimes experience like just like if you're boating, it's any other boating experience as well. So sometimes you get tugs and barges as you're
Yeah.
passing by, or
Rowers.
wildlife as well too. So lots of different factors, including weather too. Weather can sneak up on you, the wind can change and weather and the waves can come right over your boat and you're like, well, didn't expect that today. So it's just kind of unexpected things, but you
Yeah.
always roll with the flow, go with the flow.
Go with the flow. And you've done a phenomenal job with it for the last 2 or 3 years now. So thank you. And thanks for all the team does on the water, obviously. I think you have a lot of the fun, besides the early morning wake up, which is demonstrated, I think, by rakes flying off boats and really cool multi-parameter sondes being dipped in the water for data collection. So thank you very much, Amir, for all you do.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit, getting back to the report card proper, about the grades. This webinar is very focused on grades. So when you look at the report card, it's very clear that there's open water grades and bay grades. So the open waters are these large segments, and there's only 2 showing here. I'm about to talk about them. The bays are what some of our team call these little skittles, and these little colored circles around the margins. And you heard Amira say embayments. That's a proper scientific term for them. She doesn't have the development and communication department telling her every time she says embayments to say bays and harbors like I do. So really we'll just stick with bays and harbors. But embayments, true. These skittles all get grades. And the Eastern Basin and the Central Basin of Long Island Sound are among some of the best water quality that we have in the open waters. That's not really a big surprise. The Eastern Basin is in very close proximity to Block Island Sound, and by that nature, the Atlantic Ocean. It receives a lot of tidal flushing from a very large ocean, which, helps with pollution, frankly. It just does. There's much less population density in the eastern portion of Long Island Sound. Again, people are the main contributors of nitrogen, be it through our waste or through our actions. So the Eastern Basin has really the best water quality Long Island Sound could ever really hope for any given year. The Central Basin also is close to the Atlantic Ocean. Oh, by the way, that's reflected in the A+ and all these indicators getting A's. And it's stable. This arrow is an indication of a statistical test that we run. If it's straight across like this, it means the grades are stable. If it's going up, they're improving. If it's going down, that's obvious. And if it's squiggly, it's variable, just so you get a sense of what those are. The Central Basin also gets a lot of flushing with the open waters of the Sound. Population density does start to pick up a bit. Obviously, we see New Haven Harbor here, for example, big population center. Though it is very stable, getting an A as well. Biggest by volume portion of Long Island Sound that gets a grade. Then we start moving our way into where a little bit more of the action has happened in the last 16 years. So this is moving west in the open Sound. The Western Basin has seen really remarkable improvements over 16 years. At this point, it's getting an A-, which is really encouraging, a demonstration that nitrogen pollution reduction that's happened, big investments, millions and millions and millions of dollars, lots of money, let's just put it that way, have been working. There's still some issues here, though. Even though it's an A-, this yellow fish is the dissolved oxygen grade. So obviously there's still a bit more room for improvement in the Western Basin. This squiggly line means it's variable in terms of its 16-year trend. But, with continued actions, we should be seeing a potential improvement in the Western Basin, an actual statistical improvement. And hopefully this yellow starts to diminish and go to a B or an A. The Eastern Narrows, if you're really a report card junkie and have been following along, the first and second report card, we demonstrated really remarkable statistically significant improvements in the Eastern Narrows. It went from a D at one point up to where it is now at a B. It's been, it goes through some fluctuations, but the Eastern Narrows is really a success story. It has a B now. It does have that D for dissolved oxygen. That's what that orange fish is showing. So more work could be done in this area. Obviously, we're getting more and more towards large population centers, and just more people and more toilets and more lawns and more hardened surfaces. So it's a bit more challenging in this area. Ultimately, though, wastewater treatment plants are fueling the majority of the nitrogen, a major source of the nitrogen that enter these waters. So, it comes into question, do we need to do more? And the Eastern Narrows is seeing improvement, and it is seeing statistical improvement in its dissolved organic carbon and chlorophyll A grades, which is really encouraging. Although it's moderate improvement, it is improvement. So it is on the right trajectory in terms of the Eastern Narrows. Unfortunately, things like climate change and warming waters pose challenges outside of just nitrogen management. So it's going to be important that management of Long Island Sound takes into account, and continue to take into account climate change, which is very real, warming waters and stressors outside of our direct control in respect to nitrogen. And then we get to the Western Narrows, and man, I was rooting for the Western Narrows just as hard as I was rooting for the Yankees last night, but we know how that turned out. So, the Western Narrows does and is receiving an F. There is encouragement in this F, though. We're not a doom and gloom organization, and we write about that encouragement in this F. It is seeing improvement, hence the arrow pointing up. The Western Narrows is seeing improvement. It had almost a completely flatlined grade 16 years ago of about a 0 across the board, and now it's jumped almost half the grading scale into it's at a 49%. So that's a remarkable improvement, but it does stay in the F zone, which is indicative of definitely more action being necessary here. And does that take the form of, something that David Abreu is about to talk about in terms of nitrogen reduction in Rikers Island, renewable Rikers Island? Maybe. Does it take the form in more ratcheting of nitrogen from wastewater treatment plants? Likely. But also maybe even reevaluating the total maximum daily load that was set for Long Island Sound, which is a management nitrogen diet that was set for the Sound that resulted in a lot of these improvements that we're seeing. But maybe the Western Narrows is unique, and it certainly is in respect to how it functions and needs additional measures. So with that, I do want to introduce David Abreu from our team. David, myself, and others go out and talk about the report card now that it's issued and what it means. So David Abreu, I'd like to pass it over to you for a couple minutes on some discussions we recently had on the Western Narrows and New York City waters.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Hi everyone, good to be here with you all today. Just to kind of give us a quick overview, this is a quick snapshot of one of our bays in the Western Narrows. This is Flushing Bay in Queens. And you can see here that there are two segments to this bay overall, right? We have the outer Flushing Bay and the inner Flushing Bay. And this image is pulled from our website, soundhealthexplorer.org. And it really gives us a good view at what we're talking about when it comes to some of the issues that we're facing in the Western Narrows, right? So we can see on this area, there's not a lot of green, right? There is a lack of things like parks and natural buffers that really protect the bay from stormwater runoff, right? You heard Peter mention that earlier in the webinar. And this is just indicative of the amount of impervious surface that is found in New York City and here in Queens specifically, right? So on Sound Health Explorer, you can actually pull up a couple different layers. I don't have that ready for us here, but please, I encourage everyone to go on the website and mess around with the layers and the maps, and you can see for yourself. But this area has a very high percentage of impervious surface, which again is one of the factors leading to the stormwater runoff problem in this area. And if you were to continue messing with those layers, you can also bring up our wastewater CSO outfall layer, and that will really give an indication as to the wastewater runoff, wastewater discharge problem in the Western Narrows, right? We have CSOs all along the bay, and that's really, problematic throughout the entire Western Narrows. And that's really fueling, as Peter mentioned, the F grades that we're seeing in the Western Narrows overall. So that brings us to, as Peter mentioned again, solutions for this area, right? And we see here the Western Narrows on the left-hand side. It's doing pretty poorly all throughout. We have a couple bays that are performing better than others, but overall, they are receiving F grades. And so one of the solutions that are proposed is something called renewable Rikers. And this would be a generational game changer for the area that can really impact the water quality on the open waters of the Western Narrows, but also specifically the bays and harbors. And essentially what it is, it's a plan to construct a state-of-the-art wastewater treatment facility on Rikers Island, should that land be used for, developments for the city post closing of Rikers Jail. And so what this would do is it would redirect the flows from 4 outdated wastewater treatment plants to the state-of-the-art plant and really lead to those nitrogen reductions that we're looking for in the Western Narrows. There's really a lot more that goes into it than that, but that's our brief overview. And please, I encourage again everyone to go on Sound Health Explorer and mess around with the maps and look up the feasibility study for Rikers, renewable Rikers, and see for yourself what's planned for the area and how this can really be a game changer for this area of the Sound.
Yeah, thank you, David. And it's fun going out and talking about these grades with you. Just last week, we were talking with the Queens Borough President's Office about, ways that we could partner with them to, help encourage renewable Rikers and help get better water quality in Queens and Flushing Bay. And, I look forward to more and more of those conversations as the year goes on. It's a pleasure working with you. Thank you for the overview. Someone on my team just pointed out that I did not mention yet, but will now, that while this is the 2024 Long Island Sound report card, our grades are always based on the year prior, right? 2024 is not even over yet. Amira was just out on the water yesterday. I was talking to her. It's always fun. She does like the Blair Witch from the boat's moving around. She's talking, hands-free, of course. But 2024 is still happening. So the 2024 report card is based on 2023 data. So just a heads up if you were curious about that. And one last peek of this before we get to our partners, this east to west gradient we were just talking about in the open waters. And then you notice all the bays and harbors don't always, or embayments as Amira likes to call them, don't always line up with that east to west. We've got orange and orange out here. Bays and harbors are subject to a lot more local pressures, fertilizer, septic tanks, stormwater runoff, where the open waters are largely, not only, but largely fueled by wastewater treatment plants. So as we talk about bays and harbors, and we do, and this is a great roadmap for bays that need protection and for those that need remediation, each one has its own hyper-local fingerprint of nitrogen pollution and the percentage of nitrogen from different sources that enters them. So something that our team evaluates, and we'd be happy to talk more about in the question section. But I do want to bring on some Unified Water Study partners that are a real pleasure to work with. These black circles are showing where these partners are. So again, I mentioned Project Oceanology in Eastern Long Island Sound. That's the black circle furthest east. Then we have Friends of the Bay in the Cold Spring Harbor, Oyster Bay complex, North Shore, Long Island. And then Westchester Creek, number 33 down here with Katarina is going to be holding it down and anchoring this discussion. So if you are following along, good for you. On Sound Health Explorer, this is an example of what you could see. We have Mumford Cove and the Pequannock, one of many Pequannock in Connecticut. Always fun to get those mixed up. These are two bays that Project Oceanology monitors. And if you click on one, such as Mumford Cove, you could get into more details online about the grades. And honestly, you could go into it further and further, as David was talking about. Look at the actual data, look at charts, look at a summary. We're not going to do that today. What I'd like to do is introduce Callie from Project Oceanology to share her experiences with the Unified Water Study.
Great, thanks so much, Peter. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our experience at Project O. If you're not familiar with us, I just want to share a little bit about who we are. We're located in Groton, Connecticut. We're on the Avery Point campus, and our focus is really marine science education. We're a nonprofit. And so this is our second year participating in the Unified Water Study. This is just some images of our team. So we have our educators that are also wearing multiple hats here at Project O, and they are getting up early in the morning to get in the field. We get to participate in the training and then also the data entry as well.
Always smiling.
So our two sample sites are Mumford Cove and the Pequannock River. Both are located in Groton. The map that you're seeing here, the sort of orange and the pink colors, this is from Connecticut Deep. That's Bluff Point State Park and Coastal Reserve. And so our embayments are just to the east and west of that land. I included an image of our skiff. So we're using a flat bottom Carolina skiff to get out into our different water bodies here, because at low tide, it is shallow. And so that's one of the challenges that we're facing. But if you take a look at that sunrise picture.
Oh, sorry, I jumped the gun.
No, you're good. So the first site I'll talk about is Mumford Cove. The yellow stars are roughly our sample sites along the cove. So again, we're bordered by Bluff Point State Park. There are some residential areas. There's a little marina in Mumford Cove, Groton Long Point. There's also some residential areas there too. There's conditional shellfishing in this cove. And so some of the challenges I think that are local to this area have to do with the marina and then some of the residential areas. So stormwater, runoff, fertilizer. There's tons of beautiful eelgrass here. There's lots of waterfowl and geese, so that can pose an issue with bacteria. And as I mentioned, at low tide, it's just really slow going for us. It does take us the full 3 hours when we're trying to visit both sites. And here are just a few images so you get a flavor of Mumford Cove, but it's beautiful. It's usually quiet, especially when we're out there in the morning. Like to watch the kingfisher and the ospreys. Beautiful eelgrass you can see in the top images. And then that's from the macro algae study. You can see the rake toss. So other algae mixed in, but lots of eelgrass. So that's a little flavor of Mumford Cove. Our other site is the Pequannock River. The Pequannock is really near and dear to us at Project O. We spend a lot of time there with students in the school year, exploring the beaches and the marshes, and also with our summer campers. So you can see our sample sites with those yellow stars. Again, we've got Bluff Point on one side, and then it's the Groton New London Airport that makes up most of the other shoreline. There are some residential areas up towards the headwaters. And again, this is an area where there is conditional shellfishing. There's no shellfishing up in the headwaters, but some of the challenges here are really runoff and stormwater. Again, There's a goose population that is non-migratory, so we're finding them year round. So bacteria associated with that, and then some low oxygen levels. Again, shallow here too, so the skiff is really helpful when we're operating at low tide. So you can see the top right corner, that's from some of our macroalgae work. Lots of sargassum is what we're finding here in the Pequannock River. Towards the bottom left, you see that's a live scallop that actually came up in our survey. We found a few of those with lots of algae attached to them. Usually we see the eagles in the morning. The picture next to the eagle is a spider crab that had fishing line tied up in it. We pulled that up in one of our rake tosses. So that guy was freed and sent on its way. And just some really nice sunrise images here. And I wanted to just close by just talking a little bit about some of the action that we're getting students involved in taking in their watershed. So we use these Long Island Sound report card grades when we're teaching. We have kids getting out in the field doing some similar work to what we're doing as part of the Unified Water Study, and making them say, hey, how healthy do you think this water is? And then taking it to that next step, you can see some rain barrel installations, some pollinator gardens, and then kind of tracing their water from their schoolyards. What happens to that water in the storm drain, and some educational campaigns around that too.
That is so cool. I love that big jaws around the storm drain. That's unique. Thanks, Callie. A quick question for you, or actually just a statement. You know, Mumford Cove, one of the better water quality embayments of Long Island Sound, right? I mean, it has wonderful water quality. Eelgrass is a great example of that. Eelgrass only grows in areas that have good, almost excellent water quality, right? But it wasn't always that way. There was definitely an issue at Mumford Cove. Do you think you could talk briefly to like where it was and now where it is supporting eelgrass?
Yeah, I mean, we've never looked so in depth, you know, and until we started participating in this survey. Again, we've just been doing this for a couple of years now, but you know, the eelgrass beds are just really impressive.
Yeah, they're just everywhere. And so
Yeah.
there was a wastewater treatment plant outfall that was in Mumford Cove, and it really was a pretty eutrophic system from what I gathered, and there was not eelgrass in it at that time. And it was in the 90s that outfall was moved out to the open waters, and it took a couple decades, but then all of a sudden eelgrass was just, you know, prolific in it. And it's such a leading example of, you know, taking that action and seeing change. And trust me, we're all very jealous of you when you show those pictures. Amira could whip out some New York City pictures and things that float down the Westchester River, but they're not quite as, well, maybe spooky for Halloween, but they're not quite as scenic as some of the ones you shared. So thank you very much, Callie.
You're welcome.
Next up, speaking of New York City waters, we have Westchester Creek. I want to introduce Dr. Katerina Panseca to talk a little bit about Westchester Creek, which is, of course, receiving an F and a bit of a challenged waterway in the Western Narrows, Upper East River. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here and to learn about these other embayments, especially those that are a little bit healthier than Westchester Creek. But you know, despite that poor grade, this image is of us sampling. There's so many shorebirds in Westchester Creek, and it can be quite beautiful early in the morning when we're out there. I want to highlight how this program and participating in Unified Water Study has really tied into our Marine Environmental Science program at SUNY Maritime College. Being right on the water, we on the East River, or the confluence of the East River and the Long Island Sound, we do a lot of nearshore monitoring. So Westchester Creek and just being involved in UWS has been a great opportunity for our students to get really relevant training, but then to also participate in environmental advocacy. So here's some images of students that have worked through the past 3 seasons in Westchester Creek, and we'll keep it going. And I also, we've been looking at the grades overall, but I wanted to highlight just how even within and within our sampling sites, there's a lot of variability. So even though we get that poor F grade, these stations, one being the innermost station and then moving towards station 6 outwards, these are dissolved oxygen data from 2023. Just again, obviously that made it into the report card, but you can see the variability. And obviously with the innermost stations having the worst kind of water quality. And this image is common for us to see kind of in the midway of the sampling season, lots of dead fish amongst a lot of other debris that's floating in Westchester Creek. So just a little bit more about Westchester Creek. It's mostly stormwater runoff and CSO outflow. There's not really a major natural freshwater source. And on our own, through the years outside of the tier 1 sampling, we've added the Enterococcus. The map is showing our sampling sites. We're doing 3 sites for Enterococcus. And then those blue circles are all the outflows. So some are combined sewer and some are just stormwater outflows, but wet or dry. I don't want to get into the weeds on the guidelines here because they can vary, but the Enterococcus levels are pretty high. And again, we have data, we separate this out between dry and wet weather, and it's still quite high because of all the runoff. And then also some other, we talked about some other folks mentioned just impervious surfaces, et cetera. There is a lot of wetland along Westchester Creek, but then you see these sites where, people are just dumping a lot of stuff onto that marsh grass. And, those natural buffers are kind of being decimated. So we have reported things like what you see on the left here, just discarded pallets, all kinds of, large marine debris, and then not just on the shoreline, but even in the water. So we have talked a lot with, and we've had folks from New York City parks come out and actually, we're on their radar for hauling some of this stuff out of Westchester Creek, which will be exciting.
Definitely. Well, thank you. It's a lot of fun having you all on the program. Pleasure working with you, and I love seeing those pictures of course, happy samplers. Westchester Creek definitely having some challenges, and just looking at the Enterococcus, I mean, those values are really high, right? I mean, 20,000 is really through the roof in some places. So not only is there a nitrogen issue, but the pathogen indicator bacteria monitoring is showing, some very high levels of waters that wouldn't just be not so safe for fish and wildlife, which you showed with the nitrogen pollution, but for people. So a lot of challenges in this portion of Long Island Sound, but a lot of people that care deeply about it too. So, partnering hopefully with you all and others, we could see some of these grades start to improve. And it's no small feat. It probably would have already been done if it were, but just keeping it up and the advocacy up is so important. Do you, when you're out and about, say after a rainstorm or such, I mean, it's visibly different, right? Like I know our team sees some remarkable differences in Eastchester where there's CSOs. So what do you see like after rainstorms in Westchester Creek?
It's a river of debris. I mean, you can see clear like sheen on the surface. And honestly, I mentioned this, it's like that a lot of the times when it's dry. I didn't include some of those images, but I mean, we even called in an oil spill that we had sampled through one season. I think it was our first season. So the smell, even the sand was needed to go through. I think I called Elena or texted an emergency. I was like, I put my sand in an oil spill. I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was just, you really wanted to get that data. Right. But it looks pretty bad even when it's dry, and they are doing a lot of construction, I will say, and the overpass there, which now I forget what that roadway is. And that's, I think, also impacted the flow in the creek this last season. So, so things have changed. It'll be interesting to compare next year to this year. So we had a lot of days where some of our sites like site 1 and 2 weren't even accessible because it was just blocked off by
That's right.
barges.
That's right. I remember you brought that
Yeah.
up to our team.
So it
Well,
looks
thank you.
bad. Yeah.
Room for improvement, definitely. Yeah, there's some poor water quality. Thank you. Next up, we have Friends of the Bay. I just highlighted one of the bay segments, Inner Cold Spring Harbor, that they monitor on Sound Health Explorer, but they are a powerhouse group in 4 bay segments. So Caroline, one sec. Yeah, Caroline and Amanda, please go for it.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. We are Friends of the Bay. We are a nonprofit environmental advocacy organization located in Oyster Bay out on Long Island. We work to protect Oyster Bay and Cold Spring Harbor through advocacy outreach and water quality monitoring, which we do with Save the Sound. My name is Caroline Fabian. I'm the program coordinator. With me is Amanda Hornung, and she is our volunteer coordinator, and we are pretty much the sampling team. We actually did hire a part-time employee to do the UWS program for us, but things did not work out. So we were very happy to take over, but there was definitely a learning curve for us. We both started this summer, so we were excited to be out on the water. And then with us is Christine Suter in that photo, who's our executive director. You're all good.
So we work within the Oyster Bay Cold Spring Harbor watershed, and this estuary is about 6,000 acres, spanning almost 40 linear miles of shoreline. It's been the site of a large shell fishery. It contains a national wildlife refuge. It's also a state designated significant fish and wildlife habitat and has been identified by New York State as an outstanding natural coastal area.
So this map is a little crazy, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of what we're dealing with. So we have 3 embayments that we're working on, and over all of them, we have 14 Tier 1 stations, which you can see in gray. We have 13 Tiers 2 stations, which are a subset of the gray points, and then also the red points are our tributaries. We also have 4 continuous DO loggers, 1 pressure logger, and then the green dots are 9 macrophyte sites. So we have a lot of sites that we're dealing with, and especially on Tier 2 days when we're working with that big yellow pump, we very much put it to the test. Have to bother Elena a lot for new parts, and are constantly kind of troubleshooting the best way to get it all done.
So our first embayment or bay is Millneck Creek, and this creek is actually currently listed as uncertified, meaning no one can actually eat any shellfish from here. But in the past, the Department of Environmental Conservation has allowed permits for dredging to transport shellfish out of here into Oyster Bay. But currently they can't at all. So the bottom of the creek is also very soft and muddy. It's okay. Which can cause some issues with the sonde, actually. It kind of messes up the turbidity reading sometimes. And then in addition to the muddy bottom, we have a lot of problematic outfalls that flow directly into the creek. It's surrounded by houses. There's a lot of septic leakage, which may play a role in the uncertification. And then there's also a bridge right at the edge of the site. And if the water's too high, we actually have to call for them to lift the bridge, which is like a whole process, and it's very slow.
So that bridge leads into Oyster Bay. So Oyster Bay is where the majority of the wildlife refuge is. It is also, this embayment has been the site of one of the longest running shell fisheries on Long Island, which has been done primarily through hydraulic dredging. Their lease actually ended at the end of September, and that is over. There's a 6-month moratorium on shell fishing in the bay. And this bay is kind of similar to Millneck Creek. The bottom is really muddy, and there's not a lot going on down there, unfortunately.
So then our last area is Cold Spring Harbor, and this area is actually kind of split up into 2 halves. There's outer and inner. Outer Cold Spring, it's a lot more open, a lot more space. There's some parts of it that are a little bit less muddy, which is pretty nice. But inner Cold Spring Harbor is very tight. It's a little marina. It's very similar to Millneck Creek, where it's very muddy and shallow, which can make certain areas kind of hard to access if the tide's too low. And it's also uncertified for shell fishing, which is probably due to its own outfalls surrounding it and septic issues.
And then we did want to take a second just to talk about our tributaries. We have 4, and these are all for tier 2. So we use the water pump. And you can see in these pictures, we are a team. All of us are under 5'2". So reaching some of the sites can be really difficult. We have to stand on a bucket for one of them and drop the sand over 10 feet. So yeah, there's a couple problems with that. The one in the middle is our favorite because we just get to sit down and chill out. But yeah, and then around the middle of the summer when it's dry, all of these are really shallow, so we often have to avoid like sucking up mud in the pump, and we have to take those depth measurements kind of by eye because our sonde depth sensors aren't even in the water.
And then finally end off, in addition to our main little team of 3, we do have volunteers that come in and out, and they're great. They're really helpful with the field work, but that also means we're kind of constantly training new people, which can slow us down on some days.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
Parker. I forget, when did you get that boat?
It was in the last couple years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. We used to do the sampling on like a dinghy apparently, so.
Yeah, that was a nice upgrade for you all. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your experiences. There is a question in the chat. Maybe you could type an answer while I'm wrapping up, and we could get back to it verbally too. But take a look. It's from Nancy Seligson. So in closing for us, we like to point out ways that people can take action for Long Island Sound. This is the last slide. Also, just something we like to finish on, the report card. This is directly from the report card. So, things that people can do, people on this webinar, also just share with your, friends, colleagues, whatever it may be. Reducing water usage can go a long way, and it's really something that most people can do. It lightens the load on wastewater treatment plants, reduces wear and tear on pipes. Maintaining sewers, whether they are private sanitary sewers underground that are municipally owned, or public that are municipally owned, or our private sewer lines that come from our homes. If you have a private sewer line coming from your house going to the municipal sewer line, and you're constantly bringing Roto-Rooter in to clear your line, it means there's cracks. It means that roots have gotten in, there's cracks in your sewer line. It's likely oozing sewage at a very constant rate when you're using water that needs to be repaired. Municipalities really need to do their part in replacing and repairing and proactively maintaining sewer lines that are underground, making their way to wastewater treatment plants. And then outdated septic systems and cesspools, really important. I think I already spoke a little bit about it, but replacing cesspools with innovative alternative technology that remove upwards of 80% of the nitrogen coming from these systems is so crucial, especially for the North Shore of Long Island, where there are hundreds of thousands of cesspools, and also southeastern Connecticut and other pockets throughout the whole watershed. Climate change is real. Doing our part to reduce fossil fuel usage is so critical. Because it contributes to warming climate temperatures, but also there's a lot of nitrogen in the in what comes out of cars when they're burning fossil fuels, and that nitrogen in the air gets picked up with precipitation and brought back down to the Sound and to tributaries. So just really doing our part to shrink your carbon footprint is huge and has big benefits for Long Island Sound. Plant native, use less fertilizer, leave those grass clippings on. This time of year, if you're up for it, just mow over the leaves that are on your yard. They become a natural fertilizer, and some people take it to the next level, which we're not anti-lawn, so at the least try to mow over the leaves, but you could also just leave them on your yard. They become a really important habitat for invertebrates and other animals that use that leaf litter in the fall and winter. And make your voice heard. Last but definitely not least, show up to public meetings, stay informed, join a group like Save the Sound or Friends of the Bay or Project O, or I don't know if SUNY Maritime's taking members, but follow along, stay informed, and let your voice be heard. It's really important that you let your elected officials know and decision makers know that you want cleaner water, or you want to protect waters that are already very clean. Our voices, especially collectively, go a long way. And so with that, we want to open it up to questions and comments. Our groups will stick around. Feel free to unmute, ask a question, or drop it in the chat. It looks like we got to Nancy's question, but we've got one from Joel. So in terms of water studies at major rivers, there are the Bronx River, Westchester Creek, Flushing Bay, Flushing Creek, and sorry, excuse me. And others are part of the Unified Water Study. Hey, David Siegerman, is that you sharing your screen?
Nope.
Okay, you're gonna want to probably
Yeah, let me
stop
find that.
that.
Trying to figure out where that's coming from.
Yeah, good job. It was David Berg, who's actually a pretty he's pretty good guy, so I doubt there was anything too insidious that was about to happen. He probably didn't realize he was sharing. But either way, there are major tributaries to the New York City Western Narrows portion that are part of the Unified Water Study, the Hutch included, which do show that there are eutrophic systems. New York City Department of Environmental Protection does some extra water quality monitoring in those waters as well. So Joel asked, there are additional studies related to them. Robin, yes.
Oh, hey, Peter, thanks a lot. This was amazingly informative, and we are so thrilled to be replicating your efforts down here on the South Shore. Can you tell me, for your loaner program, are you still using the sonde as your major equipment?
Yeah, we are. And this isn't an endorsement of them, but we do use YSI XO1s and YSI Pro DSS multi-parameter sondes, and they are by far the workhorse of the water quality monitoring.
Great. And are you using artificial intelligence in any way to analyze your data?
No, we're not. I'm sure myself and my team would love if we did use more AI to analyze our data. We use templates, and for the report card, we use grading templates that are fairly advanced and give us our grades after ample quality assurance review.
Great. Thank you so much for today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining. Good to hear from you.
Peter, there were two questions. William Watts had one right here in the chat, and then I'll find you the other one.
Okay. Color-coded symbols in the Long Island Sound report card are accompanied by percent ranges. Percentages of what? The percentages are the scores. We use a 0 through 100% grading scale. So for each one of the indicators has a percentage score that translates to a grade, and the overall grade, like an A+ is 99 or 100%. So that's what the percentages are related to.
Okay, and then there's one from Callie. I just put it back in the chat for you.
Oh, from Cali.
Callie, I think it was Guasti.
Oh, different Cali. Huh?
Yeah.
All right. Gee, I might read this one out loud. Have connection between the basins, its location, and its grade. For example, if the Narrows were located in the eastern basin, but had the same New York City density, impervious surface cover, etc., would it be much cleaner simply due to how often? Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I don't have a quantitative answer for you and exactly how much cleaner or it would be, but yes, it would receive much more tidal flushing from the Atlantic Ocean, much less stagnant water or water that can often get kind of stuck through tidal cycles in the area. So if the Eastern Narrows looks like the Western Narrows, if the Eastern Basin looked like the Western Narrows just in form, but was that much closer to the Atlantic Ocean, it would have more flushing with the Atlantic Ocean, which would lead to better water quality. And how much better it is, I don't have an answer to that. I haven't seen that particular study if it exists. But it is something that's important to keep in mind. The western portion of the Sound, not just the Western Narrows, is more challenged just by geographically the shape of Long Island Sound. And then you add the population density to it, and it just exasperates that issue. Tongue-tied there. Good question. And yes, a different Callie for sure. Thank you very much, Callie. Anyone else? No?
That was it for the questions in the chat.
Great. I just want to say thank you for everyone that joined, and thanks for the great questions. Thank you so much to our partners that joined to talk and share their experiences today. It's a pleasure working with you and all the other UWS groups. We will follow up with a recording to everyone that registered, and thank you. And how about everyone that was presenting today? Just stick on just for a couple seconds. Thanks, everybody. See ya.